Monday and Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome back to the Couchside Judges. I'm Scott Fontana. Follow me on Twitter at Scott_Fontana.
And I'm Dan Urban. Follow me at the Dan Urban. Follow the podcast at Couchside Judges. And subscribe to us wherever you listen.
And if you like this show, and you must if you're listening to the Data Show, you've got to give us that 5-star review.
And as always, head on over to abcboxing.com. Read the scoring criteria because we talk judging on this show most of the time.
Is that right?
Most of the time.
Huh. That's news to me.
Yeah.
I thought we were just going to talk about the holidays and then kind of skedaddle.
Yeah, that kind of sounds fun too.
This is going to be a data show about the holidays. So like 95% of the time I have like a really good Christmas. And then,
Yeah, data show, I gained some pounds for the holidays.
I like that. How were the holidays? Because obviously we're recorded this last year. You know, right now it's 2023. Yeah. We recorded this way back in 2022. How was Christmas? We can't really talk about New Year's, but how was Christmas?
Christmas was good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ate a lot. Saw family. It was great.
You even had me drop off a little present in your mailbox.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was just the family Christmas card.
It was a good Christmas card.
I thought I would see you before Christmas. I never did because we recorded, I guess, remotely the last time, right? Because we recorded early. And we were late on getting the card together, so I was like, oh, I guess on my way to my parents, we'll pass by Totowa, and I'll just drop it in the box.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, it was good.
Good.
And your Christmas was good?
My Christmas was good.
Good.
My young boys had a very lovely time.
Nice.
Santa treated them well. Got each of them the Lego that they were hoping for.
That's Santa. He knows his stuff.
He does. I will say, though, my youngest was disappointed that Santa didn't bring all the other things he asked for on the list that he filled out at school the day that they went back for break.
Oh.
And we said to him, like, boy, you've got to tell your parents and Santa when you see him. You can't just do this 2 days before and be like, yo, I want this, and this. It's not going to work.
Needs time to prepare.
Mm-hmm. Wanted a candy cane. That was one of the things.
Okay.
No one had a candy cane around.
But a regular candy cane.
Regular candy cane. So, you know, when...
Not a secret candy cane that turns into a cookie.
No, not one of those. What do you know about that?
Yeah, I heard about it.
You're not Santa.
Yep.
Sometimes for other people, not for my children, Dan will be a Santa's helper.
Yes.
Dress up as Santa. Is not, of course, the real Santa, but he's one of the helpers.
Just a helper.
Mm-hmm. And certainly that wasn't what happened. You didn't visit my kids a few years ago. But no, on the whole, it was good. New Year's, who knows? Whatever.
Yeah, just watching football. That's it.
Sure, whatever.
Yeah.
I'll be working.
Right.
Or I did work. Whatever the tense is, that's where it's at. But we're not going to go deep into the holidays. We're also not going to talk about any live fights. There was, of course, the Bellator Rising card the other day, but that was scored differently. It wasn't under 10-point must. We're not going into that. Hopefully it was a good time. It's actually going on as we speak, as we are recording this. So we're not going to touch on it.
Wait, it's going on right now?
It's literally going on at this moment.
But that's right. But we can't watch it till 8 o'clock tonight, tomorrow night or something.
All right, so you can watch it's kind of in two pieces, right? Like there's the regular Ryzen 40 card, which is on Fight TV. I think you can watch it.
Okay.
And then that ends, and then there's the Bellator versus Ryzen card. That's like the last 5 fights, and that I believe you could also watch early, probably through Fight TV if I'm not mistaken. But if you want to watch it on Showtime on tape delay, it was at 8 o'clock on New Year's Eve.
I wonder how the Bellator pacing will be on a tape delay event.
Will have been?
Yeah.
Yeah, past tense for we're all in a mix, right?
Mm-hmm.
One would hope it would be paced pretty well. I guess by now we'll already know.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we're not going to talk about that. We're all about the data this week.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about. We do the annual data show where I will crunch the numbers of scored rounds that I've been tracking all year. And, hopefully we'll learn some interesting things. I try not to just double up on what we've done in past years because it's, a lot of the times the revelations aren't drastically different from one year to another. Maybe I'll go back at some point if I have a much more collected or let's say complete data set, because I'm trying to go work all the way back to especially UFC rounds from to 2016, like summer 2016 onward.
Okay.
Once I complete that, maybe we'll do one more where I kind of revisit some of the trends of the past and really look into what's going on.
Okay.
But by then, I'll probably have like 8 years worth of data,
It's possible.
which would be fascinating.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I think, yeah.
But before we dive into the interesting stuff,
Let's go to the boring stuff.
Well, no, this is interesting.
Oh.
This is data on just me and you.
Oh, okay.
That's
right. You've collected some
So,
data.
real quick, on this show this past year, we went over 297 contested rounds. That doesn't include past judgment or the Aries fight that we did. Nothing that just contested rounds, Bellator, PFL, UFC, 297 rounds. We disagreed on 70 of those rounds.
You and I did. Okay.
Yes.
So that's what, like 1 out of every 4 or so?
But out of all those disagreements, we still end up in the majority each, a total of 199 times.
Interesting.
98 times in the minority, so 33%
Sure.
of the time we agree with the judge in the minority. So
What do we call that?
the outjudge. Oh no, these aren't. Well, it is a couchside override if we both agree on it,
Oh, I see.
but we don't always agree on it.
Right, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And I understand now what you're saying.
And in 10-9 versus 10-8, we had 54 of those rounds.
Okay.
We agreed on 45 of them. I was in the majority 32% of the time. You were not 32, just 32 times. You were 35 times. I was dead even in distributing 10-9s versus 10-8s, 27 apiece.
Mm-hmm.
You were slightly heavy on the 10-8, 29 10-8s, and 25 10-9s. I found it fascinating that we disagreed 70 times, but still landed in the same amount of times
That is
we
pretty
agreed
wild.
with majority versus minority.
That's wild, yeah. No, I will definitely be touching more on the Couchside Override element, but I'll circle back to that at the end because I've got a whole mess of data that I think is probably more interesting for people at large rather than just specifically to consumers of our show, of which I hope you continue to be, or maybe you're new and you want to stick around. Hey, the more the merrier.
That's right.
Gabagool.
All right.
Yeah.
That does it for me and you. Now you get into the good stuff.
The good stuff. First, I gotta set the table here, right?
Okay.
So we are working off of the fact that I have been collecting round data throughout the year for UFC, Bellator, PFL, all of 2022. This is the first year that I actually have a complete data set, every single round from those 3 promotions. It's been challenging in the past to get every single round, but it did finally happen this time, so I'll pat myself on the back for that one. That is 970 UFC scored rounds, 407 Bellator scored rounds, and 192 PFL scored rounds for a grand total of 1569.
It's a lot.
It's a whole lot of rounds. It's a whole lot of rounds. When you're doing it week to week, it doesn't really take up a whole lot of time. I mean, it's a little time, but you kind of chip away here and there, right? Couple things I want to make sure I say. Thank you very much to those who provide this data, the UFC through their @UFC News Twitter handle, as well as on their website. Those are both terrific resources. The funny thing is sometimes one will update before the other.
Oh, yeah?
When you're trying to get it in real time and I'm trying to share it or post it or whatever and kind of get the engagement first or whatever the hell it is, right? Or just kind of share what I want to say, because sometimes I really just want to know what it was, whatever the scorecard was. But yeah, it's weird that one of them will go first and then the other will go second sometimes. Neither here nor there.
A lot of times I'm praying, please be unanimous. Please be
well,
unanimous.
yeah, if we hear 29-28, unanimous 29-28, we're hoping that maybe we don't have to dive deep into that one. The Paddy Pimblett fight would have been one. Probably we would have had to talk about it anyway. Just
you had to talk about that one.
But that ended up being one of those deceptive unanimous 29-28s where not everyone had the same card. So yeah, I get you there. Bellator PR, as you'd imagine, the Bellator PR handle on Twitter. They have been much better, I think, this year than in past years, even with sharing their scorecards, both full and partial. And I'm very optimistic that will continue and maybe even be even more complete in 2023. I definitely pestered the heck out of the Bellator PR team to kind of make that happen. I take a lot of credit for being annoying in making that happen. But I think we're all on the same page now, which is terrific. And I do appreciate them providing that information for both me, and I think there's a lot more people out there that appreciate it than people would have thought maybe a few years ago. I think there's a hunger for this type of information, right? PFL, they share their scorecards with media via an assets link. They don't do any sort of thing on social media, but they make it available for, media members such as I who get the emails with all that stuff. So I try to share those whenever I can. If there's something interesting out there, I like to just make sure I disseminate that to the masses. And a huge, again, thank you to the media relations teams at these promotions, the regulators who've been helpful in providing me some maybe information that was slipped through the gaps, officials who've also been very good at kind of keeping me in the loop of what's going on. It's truly appreciated. So, thank you to all involved in helping complete this data set. Now, a reminder as we get into this data, though, there's a few things you got to understand that this is it's a limited look. We're only going to mostly look at 1 year of data. And that tells, kind of different things, right? It can't tell you every single thing because some judges just don't work as much as others in past years, that kind of thing. More data tells you more, right?
Yeah.
It tells a better story.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, many judges who are excellent assessors of rounds, sometimes they work maybe fewer UFC rounds, maybe fewer Bellator rounds. Sometimes we're only talking about UFC, so maybe they're underrepresented in that conversation. Keep that in mind. I think we've made greater strides this year. I've made greater strides this year in filling in my data going back to, like I said, August 2016. That's kind of what I'm aiming for that's when the criteria was overhauled. Kind of started in 2017, but I think there was like a soft launch in 2016 is my understanding of it. But now I have a complete data set going back to the beginning of 2019. Finished that year off this year. So now it's 4 full years, 19, 20, 21, and 22 for UFC specific round data, I should say. Still missing some. So if you have any information and can help me out, a lot of ways you can get me at Scott_Fontana. DM me on Twitter or Instagram. I'm responsive, not mean. Hopefully you can help me. Email scottrfontana@gmail.com. Whatever you can do to help me out. Really appreciate it. Would love to be able to complete this data set for everybody now.
The real data.
The real data.
Not the fake data you see going around on Twitter.
Well, it's not fake data. It's just
incomplete.
It's incomplete because what happens is some people will go to MMA Decisions, which is a fantastic resource by Chris McMaster, and we really appreciate all the work that Chris does. Chris has been very helpful to me in particular when I reach out to him, and he'll sometimes provide me information that I'll request and can disseminate. And I, of course, give credit where it's due for that. So I do thank him. But it is an incomplete resource when a lot of people are just sharing, let's say a split decision. It's just like, who was a out judge on a split decision, right? You got to go with the rounds. And unfortunately, there's not an easily searchable way for that on MMA Decisions at this time.
They're pulling data and skewing it in a way that they want to come out already, how they perceive it to be.
It does lack a lot of context.
So,
you're right. One thing I want to talk about,
but I wasn't knocking MMA Decisions.
No,
They're
no,
fantastic.
Yeah,
it's all the people trying to be the data guy. You're not the data guy. Scott's the data guy.
There's room for other data guys.
No.
All right. Dan says there's no room for other data guys, so you guys are SOL. But that's Dan. That's not me. Couple of things I want to mention because we're going to be talking about dissents. We always talk about dissents in these data shows. Now, dissent isn't where the judge is just the out judge no matter what. When we say dissent, we do specifically mean when a judge disagrees with the two other judges on who won the round. That's for these purposes a dissent. Sometimes we'll talk about the 8-9 split or the 8-7 split or something like that if there's anything like that, right? Or a 10-10 and a 10-9 split.
There technically was.
We're not getting into points lost.
But I'm just saying, there technically was an 8-7 split.
Yes.
But I'm just saying.
But we're talking about the numbers that the judges are meant to put down before the points are. You're getting into the weeds here, sir. But I just want people to understand what a dissent is for purposes of this show when we talk about data. Being a dissenting judge, mind you, does not mean that the judge was wrong. It means that they were not agreed with by their peers. That doesn't mean they were wrong. Sometimes they're the hero to the story. Or sometimes they just saw it a slightly different way, and it was perfectly fine to see it that way too.
A lot of scores are defendable.
It just means you're the minority assessment. That is it. Simple as that. And of course, often rounds, as frequent listeners of the show know, you can argue a round one way or the other. Not always, right? I think we can get into it now. I think I got the spiel out of the way. It's the boring part, but we got to do it. Like, it makes sure people understand what we're talking about here.
Can you repeat that?
No. No. We got to get into it, sir. Stop belaboring the point.
Let's go.
All right, where do you want to start?
You tell me. You're the guy.
Well, why don't we get into maybe some notable trends? That's kind of what I labeled this portion of the show on the outline, that I was hoping you would just set me up so I could spike, sir. How dare you?
I never played volleyball.
Not in gym?
I played, well, yeah, I did play in gym. I did play volleyball. That was stupid comment.
Everyone played that. Yeah, that was weird.
Never mind.
Yeah.
Just get on with the notable trends.
All right, you can stop talking then. So, for starters here, the overall descent rate is something that I tweeted about recently. And actually it was shouted out by John Anik on his Anik and Florian podcast. And I did appreciate the shout out. It was kind words from John Anik. But something I wanted to make sure I put in a little more context with regard to that. So the descent rate in the UFC rose for the third year in a row. This year, out of all the rounds, the descent rate was 7.24%, up from 6.71 the previous year. And in 2020, it was all the way down at 5.77. So we're at 1.5% higher 2 years later. Mind you, 2020 was the year that everyone was more or less in a bubble. It was almost the same judges every single week. There really just wasn't a whole lot of variability in who was judging these fights. And also, for the record, I should point out, 2019, the year before the pandemic, it was 7.03%. So technically, this year was even higher than that previous year. So it was more or less based on a comment that John Anik had made, that it just feels to him like judging has never been in a worse place. I'm not saying he's right, but there at least is some data that could point to that, right? But I think you got to get deeper into the data, right? It doesn't just that data really is kind of just one piece of the puzzle. You have to kind of like figure out the reasons why this is happening, right? So what I did is I decided I would dive into, the number of judges who kind of like frequently work, as opposed to the ones who are maybe they're only going to judge like 6 rounds or something like that. They come to their territory. UFC traveled around a little bit more this year. They went to Columbus, they went to France, they went to several places, right? Places that they didn't go very often. So what we're looking at here is there are 15 judges that worked at least 40 rounds in the UFC. We're again still specifically on UFC. 15 judges who worked at least 40 rounds in the UFC. And that is a combined 79.9% of the rounds. So these guys are working 4 out of 5 rounds, right? Mm-hmm. The majority of them are that. Of that group, the average judge from that group dissented 6.83% of the time. So lower than that total, which means, of course, the other 50 judges who had 40 or fewer rounds each and accounted for 20% of the rounds, they dissented 8.87% of the time, significantly higher. 2% more likely to disagree, those judges who work less frequently than the other ones.
Okay. So those 15 are the traveling judges, pretty much, right?
Essentially, yes. Somewhat, I mean, it's
for the most part.
Yes and no. I mean, there's some of them are the international judges, the ones who work in the UK especially, or Europe. We didn't really get to Brazil, we'll be in Brazil next month actually.
Yeah.
Or this month. Oh
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
it is January now. It's January now.
Remember what time you're in?
Oh God, everything's screwy. Gotta remember what year I'm in, sir. For God's sake. We don't go very many places right now. 2023 this year looks to be is going to be a little different. At least the first 2 pay-per-views are not in American soil. It's a little different. So, but nonetheless, this is a clear difference between these 2 groups. I mean, what does that kind of say to you when you hear this data? Because a lot of this is new to you.
This in particular, I guess maybe they're just not getting as many reps. The other 15, they work often together.
They do.
They convert to
in groups
together
too. Again, some of these are like the UK judges that they would work together themselves. Yeah,
they know each other. They're bouncing ideas back and forth. They're having these meetings in the back after each fight, talking about the fights nonstop with the same group of people. I feel they probably get more on in tune with each other a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. I also feel like what this says is that just because these guys, and a woman in the case of Adelaide Bird, just because we hear their names all the time, and that might mean, hey, maybe they're going to post a bunch of rounds we don't like. The people who like to say, fire this judge, fire that judge, replace these judges, they're old judges, I'm tired of hearing their names. If you bring someone up, they may not be as ready for prime time as you think they'll be, just to give them more rep. Maybe they would be, maybe not. You're just kind of rolling the dice because you don't know better. Most of these people don't know any other judges outside of the ones they're complaining about.
Yeah, and then they'll just complain about the new guy that comes up.
It's kind of like the backup quarterback syndrome, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody wants the backup quarterback because they don't know what the backup quarterback can do.
Yeah, everyone wants to put Geno Smith in there and ruin Eli Manning's streak, but no.
Yeah, but look at Geno this year.
Now
give him time.
This year.
Give him time. Like maybe some of these other judges get them time and reps. Maybe they'll be better.
Listen, under Pete Carroll, Russ Wilson was a Hall of Fame candidate.
Sure.
Not under Pete Carroll. Big different story this year.
He does not look particularly
And
good.
Geno,
I'll give you that. We don't want to go too deep into football. We got
saying.
a lot of information to kind of get through here. But to kind of go over similar data, right? Because I already mentioned it was 6.83% for that core group, and then 8.87% dissent rate for the ones who are not essentially part of that core group, right? At least for this particular year. Some of the judges who didn't quite make the cut are judges who work a lot, but again, they just didn't get as many UFC rounds this year. That's just the way it worked out.
Are you moving past the dissent right now?
Oh, I'm still kind of on this, but I wanted to kind
Okay.
of talk about the ideas of how it had been in like previous years, right? To give a little more context, right?
Good.
So 2021, 16 judges, same cutoff, scored 90% of the rounds, so it was an even higher percentage of them. Their dissent rate was 6.57. So really, it's only just a little bit higher this year over last year. It's really very little different. The other judges, by the way, there were 24 judges who did that other, roughly 10%, 9.8. They dissented 8% of them. So again, we're still seeing a difference, a marked difference between the ones who work more frequently compared to the ones who work less frequently. 2020, 19 judges worked 93% of those rounds. And again, that was the pandemic year, right?
That was, yeah.
They dissented 5.61% of the time. And mind you, that was before we had kind of that interruption with the Dana White and the 10-8s and calling that out and kind of thing. And I think that threw a lot of it doesn't just throw up the 10-8s. I think it threw a lot of synchronicity that the judges had been working on for a while off. But they were at 5.61 dissents, very, very low. The other 11 judges were combined, and granted, it wasn't a whole lot of rounds. We're still talking about it was a 6.5% of the remaining rounds. They dissented just about 8%. It was a little under that, 7.95. So consistently, the judges who don't work as often do not agree as well.
Yeah, could it be lack of reps? Do you think?
I think it's part of it is lack of reps. Part of it is they're not part of that core group that's having these conversations all the time. Unfortunately, I'm sure they're open to it because
I'm sure they would love it.
Andy Foster does, in California State Athletic Commission, they do the training.
Mm-hmm.
Any officials open to it. Media are open to it. Anybody can pretty much come, more or less, except for probably Joe Schmo off the street. I'm sure they'd like someone to be at least involved in the sport in one way or another, But yeah, it is an interesting revelation, I think, to me, when I saw that data.
Yeah. It's also, I want to point out the kind of what you said about Annex saying judging's never been worse, is what he's gathering. But I think it was Kenny Florian that said, well, fighters are getting better. There's going to be a lot more close fights.
Yes. I thought that was a really good point that Kenny made.
So
he seems to really understand.
The closer the fight, the more disagreement you're probably going to have.
Yeah.
But I also that goes even further back because I always thought
matchmaking too.
The UFC is very good at matchmaking.
Yes.
So, Dana White always said, "Don't leave it in the judge's hands." I always thought that was stupid because fighters are getting better. Not everyone's going to be able to finish somebody in 3 rounds.
It's not realistic.
It's not realistic to think that way. Fighters are getting better. These kids are starting training MMA at like 8 years old. It's like the fights are going to be. As much as I hate it to say it, but more rounds. Less time rounds may be the way we have to go, as much as I hate it.
So you're saying this idea that I had posed a couple years ago of 5 rounds, 3 minutes long.
I'm against it 100%.
But you're moving toward it.
Because the fighters are getting so good to just make it to separate each other, I guess. I don't know. I'm missing the word.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying.
Do I?
You do. Because you have more rounds to score, so there's more points to be attained.
Yeah, exactly.
So the right fighter should win more often, I would say.
That's why I'm a proponent of that idea.
But-
I do think it can help in a lot of ways. I think if you'd actually open up the toolbox too and give them 9, 8s, and 7s in the way that we do for, let's say, past judgment, the CSJ system, if you combine all those elements, I think you get some very diverse scores.
Let's try that first. We'll try that first.
Sure.
See where that takes us.
Sure. That one I think is probably a much more easy one to actually change.
Yeah.
No, it's never going to happen. The idea that I'm having more rounds, shorter rounds, it's basically just never going to happen.
That's not happening.
No,
But
I
just
understand
hope-
that. I just think outside the box, and I like to posit ideas out there because I don't think the sport is ready to say, yeah, we're set. It's too new. So you got to at least talk about these things, right? But yeah, no, it's true. But yeah, so that's kind of all I really had about that particular one. But what I would say though is I don't see this rise in descent rate that I was talking about initially. I don't see it as like a real problem. I really don't. It's not jumping like crazy. I mean, we're talking about it moved 0.5% from one year to the other after moving a full percent 1 year to the other, but in ways that we can understand, because again, you're introducing more judges into the mix who are more likely to disagree than the ones who were already doing it. So it makes a lot of sense. And they were interrupted in their processes, in their expectations from the commission. So unfortunate, but that's how I kind of saw it develop there. I'm not worried. I'm really not. And I don't think anyone should be crazy worried about the state of MMA judging. I just don't. Respectfully, I have all the respect in the world for John, who I think cares about this sport and isn't just a guy who works for the UFC and does a job. I think he actually cares about this sport in a way that I think you and I do as well. But I do respectfully disagree with him. I don't think it's a problem. I don't think we're heading in a bad direction. But the numbers do, again, they are trending up, right? You can't ignore it. Slightly.
Yeah.
Slightly. I'm curious to see what happens in 2023. If they continue to rise, then it's like, okay, now it's 3 years in a row, or it would be 4 years in a row. We'll see where it lands. All right, we'll talk about that in about a year from now.
Yeah. Well, so it might not, because there's going to be more events outside of the Apex this year.
It's true.
So they should get more reps.
Yeah, but
what region they go to.
Right, but it's not like they're not going to go to Atlanta, Georgia 5 times next year to improve the quality of, or give better reps to the judges that are there on an ESPN, or excuse me, on a UFC show, right? It's not quite going to work that way.
I mean, but here's one thing. Australia's been closed for how long? Have they had shows there in the meantime? I'm not gonna post. I don't know.
I don't think they had been having many shows there, but
so
we'll talk about Australia in a little bit. Don't worry.
We're gonna get there.
Yeah, we'll get to Australia.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I'll have some things for you.
Okay.
And actually, I think we could probably get to it right now, because one thing I did look into, and again, we're going to be traveling more this year, like we mentioned before. But one thing I did get into was the idea of, okay, maybe the judges from different geographic locations are judging at certain descent rates, right? So I looked at, because now I have a 4-year data set, I looked at the full 4-year set here, and I kind of separated them into different groups. So the main group that I had started off with was the 17 judges who worked in Nevada events. And it's not just when they worked in Nevada, but they're ones who are licensed in Nevada in the last 4 years, right? 17 judges. They judged combined rounds. Now, mind you, this is kind of like triple the number of rounds, but it's the combined rounds because each one has their own, right? So combined 8,322 rounds with 546 descents between them. Their descent rate was 6.56. Perfectly normal, perfectly acceptable, right? That's more or less like where you'd expect roughly the average to have been anyway. The UK judges, the 6 most frequently judging UFC UK judges, had 956 rounds, and their rate was 6.90. So pretty much in line, right? It's just a little higher, but kind of negligible when you really get down to it. The 6 non-UK Euro judges that worked the most. Pretty much anybody, I should say, the cutoff is more or less if they had 25 rounds scored.
Okay.
Still a very low number, but when you group them in, it counts. It's not so bad. Those judges were actually at 5.52% over 670 rounds. So they were even better. Brazil doesn't have as much data, I have to point out. I only had 2 judges with at least 25 rounds here. Most of these rounds are Guilherme Bravo.
Okay.
We had 143 rounds total out of that group. The descent rate was 7.69. So there's an uptick there, right? It's about 1% higher than what we're typically used to with those other groups. The Aussie judges, like we talked about before.
Okay, yeah.
175 rounds. Again, this is a little bit smaller sample size, but we're over 100.
And what's the time frame again?
Last 4 years.
Last 4 years, okay.
Starting January 2019 to present.
Okay.
UFC rounds, their descent rate was 12.6%. That's a much larger jump.
So that's almost like 1 year, because January 2019, everything shuts down in 2020.
More or less,
And
yeah.
they're just opening now.
Well, there was a show in February 2022 in New Zealand. It wasn't Australia, but it's that region of the world, Oceania.
Yeah.
Whatever you would call the continent out there. Apologies to the geography nuts. I was second in my geography bee in middle school, but that was a long time ago. But yeah, their descent rate was at 12.6% on 175 rounds. That's significantly higher, and honestly, it doesn't surprise me because every time they go there, I feel like there's just way more rounds that we're just like, huh?
So that's what I was getting at before. Australia, kind of typical. They give us more interesting discussions, I'll say.
Interesting is an interesting word.
So we have a major event going there.
February 11th.
Will lack of reps come into play? I kind of hope not.
I mean, even if it doesn't, this is still a part of the world that seems maybe less familiar with the way to be uniform among themselves anyway.
Like Alexander Volkanovski is no stranger to close fights.
Sure.
Particularly the first fight, or the one of the fights with Holloway.
Now, look, they do sometimes fly in some of those traveling judges, right? And I imagine it will be a healthy mix of local judges and maybe one or two from the United States or the UK or Europe or what have you, right? It'll be interesting.
So I'm prepared. That'll be because
that would be an event where I would say maybe try to finish it if you can do it more than maybe you would normally. Because good golly, you just don't know.
Might this be? I mean, we're going to talk about it, but this could be like one of the biggest fights the UFC's ever booked.
Between the two champions?
And the most,
I mean, it's any champion versus champion fight is at least there's some interest because it kind of perks your ears up already, right? Mm-hmm. Especially this one. This one, it's not like this was a grudge match waiting to happen forever, but these are two guys that I think a lot of people really do agree are two of the three best fighters on the planet.
Yeah, it's one of the rare times where they don't wait too long to do one of these.
No, that's also true.
But we're going to get into that later in the year. So
and just to clean up too, the remaining 114 judges worldwide, that includes North America, everywhere in the world, right? The ones who don't fit into those categories. 1,338 rounds. The descent percentage there was 6.95. So again, more or less in line.
Yeah, everyone's kind of in step.
Yeah, except for, Brazil's a little higher and Australia's a lot higher.
Yeah.
They're kind of like doubled up of what would be ideal. They're about twice as likely to give you a round they just don't agree on. That's not great.
And that was kind of before everything shut down.
Yeah.
So, I mean...
But I'll bet you as my data comes in and I get more complete data from those parts of the world, it's probably going to continue. I actually think that.
Right, but I'm saying all this time off, do you think judging has to be a perishable skill, you would think?
I don't know.
I would think.
Depends how much work they're putting in.
Yeah.
I mean, are they watching fights on the regular? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know. It's hard to say. I'm not a judge. I would be curious what a judge thinks of that.
Mm.
You ever talked to a judge before?
From time to time.
All right. Well, maybe you go ask one.
Yeah, I could do that.
Yeah. Anyway, the last thing I wanted to kind of get to on these notable trends, right? The last trend I have here, again, this is working off of my 4-year data set, is I looked at the 6 most frequently assigned judges, or the ones who turn in, let's say, the most scored rounds for the UFC. Those 6 individuals, and those are Sal D'Amato, Derek Cleary, Mike Bell, Chris Lee, Junichiro Kamijo, and Eric Colon. Those 6 account for 49% of scored rounds.
Putting in the work.
They get a lot of the work. They eat a lot of the share there, right? Their descent rate combined is 6.10. Now, we've been throwing out numbers that are kind of 6s, high 6s, maybe low 7s. This is a low 6. That's a good number from this group that's doing most of the work. The remaining 147 judges who did the other 51%, that's more or less an even split here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their descent rate combined, 7.3. Clearly, the top judges are getting those assignments more frequently, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to be they're in step a lot more.
I think a lot of it does. They work so much together. They talk about it all the time.
One thing I would love to do, and it's going to be so labor intense. I don't know a good way to do it. Maybe you could figure it out because you've got some You got some ways about spreadsheets that probably even I'm not as good with because you went to school for similar stuff, right? You took courses in this, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I could
You could probably figure out a way to scan when all three judges, let's say like let's say a team of, for example, Sal D'Amato, Derek Cleary, and Mike Bell. How often do they dissent compared to the team of Sal D'Amato, Genichiro Kamijo, and Chris Lee, right?
I like that, actually.
I've had a lot of interest in that type of thing from officials even, too. They've been curious about how that would work. When they're working together, how well do they agree compared to other teams? That's something that probably is going to have to be worked on throughout the year. That's a big one.
That's a big undertaking.
It's a very big undertaking, but I know a lot of people would be interested in that kind of thing.
2024 data show coming to you. Yeah. 2 years away.
There you go. Well, I mean, technically, it's 2 years away. I guess that's true. Yeah, fair enough. But these are the names you hear the most. They catch the most flack, I think, because they just hear the names. But I mean, shoot,
their name.
Yeah. I think on the whole, you'd rather have one of them than any replacement person. And that's not to say the seventh most person you wouldn't substitute over them. It's just when you're grouping, when the split ended up being 51 and 49. That was kind of what I was aiming for. I wanted to shoot for where it was even.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it ended up being. If I added one more judge in there, and I think it might have been Ron McCarthy might have been the seventh, who kind of got cut back.
Okay.
For my data purposes. If you added him in, it would have been more like 52 and 48 or something like that. So I was really aiming for just a split. It's the closest I could get. So that's where it worked out. But look, we've got good judges working more of the rounds. There's room for more. There's room for more, and there's room for more people to start the process of trying to become judges. And if you think you could do it better, give it a shot. But right now, I think we've got some good, hardworking judges that are doing a good job. They're not just doing it; they're doing it well.
Yeah,
comparatively. But that was it for the main trends that I had here. Where do you want to go next?
Well, yeah, this is a spot I like. 10-8s.
Yes, you do love the 10-8s. Yeah. So we always have to reference again, like I mentioned. Dana White was highly critical last March, 2021.
Really threw a wrench in everything.
After that, Jan Blachowicz, Israel Adesanya, round 5, got two 10-8s that, not the strongest of 10-8s, but I think we both went 10-9 in that instance. But nonetheless, I don't think it was so offensive that we had to destroy everything that had been built on for several years of giving out 10-8s more frequently. Nonetheless, it happened. We have some data, of course, on 10-8 rounds in the UFC specifically. I focused more on the UFC for a lot of this stuff, to be honest. It was just, there's more, it's easier. I still don't have as complete a set going back several years of Bellator, for example, or PFL. But on UFC rounds, again, that number is 970 UFC rounds in 2022. Any 10-8 round, so whether they gave 1, 2, or 3 for that particular round, it only happened 61 times out of 970. So that's a 6.29 rate. Not very often. It used to be about double that, close to it. We're still in the same numbers, more or less, that it was last year, because last year, post Jan Izzy, there were 825 rounds after that point, and that rate was 6.79. So it's down about 0.5% this year compared to the bulk of last year.
Okay, so
not much.
That graphic, that 5% graphic that went around, they're hitting that in the UFC?
So yes and no, right? What are they aiming for? Are they aiming for a unanimous 10-8 when they say that? Or are they aiming for, they're probably aiming for everyone to be on the same page, but it doesn't happen very often, right? I think they were hitting that before. They were getting them on the same page more or less with either 2 or 3 as the majority score. That was happening before. That is not happening now, because one 10-8 round this year, just one 10-8 score, I should say, out of 3, it was 34 out of those 61. So more than half the time, only one judge is giving a 10-8 anyway. And that's 3.5% of all those 270 or 970 rounds, right? Once you get down to 2 10-8s, you're only seeing 17 times. That's 1.75%. And then all the way down to unanimous 10-8s, there were only 10 unanimous 10-8s this entire calendar year, 2022, in the UFC.
Not even a percentage.
1.03%.
Oh, 1.03.
Just over.
Yeah, you know what? I would
1 out of 100 rounds. That's pretty much what we're
If I wanted that graphic, I would say majority score would be 10-8. I would use that as my
Yeah, I would think so.
thing.
So right now we're looking at 2 3/4 more or less is what that is. So you really want it to be double what it is right now, and that is not what we have. So that's disappointing. And again, these numbers are very much in line with what we had a year earlier. I think there were 11 of these unanimous 10-8s. Again, in the latter 9 months, I should say, of 2021. So it was just a little bit more often, but really not very much. This is more or less where it's stabilized. We're kind of in a stable area here, unfortunately. Yeah.
I think just a little bit of wording changes in the criteria.
I think there's a
Look at
lot
that.
of ways I would tweak the
So-
criteria. I wouldn't go like bonk. Look, I would go bonkers with it, right? I could. But I think there's a lot of like around the margin stuff that people would reasonably, even the people who write these and are probably averse to change, you could probably get on board with some of the minor changes that I'd be talking about and clarifications and things that could hopefully push us in a better direction. But who knows? What do I know? No one listens to me except for you, dear listener. Thank you for listening to me.
I just think that one tweak in the 10-8 where it's can start thinking about a 10-8 instead of this should be a 10-8.
Yeah.
Just a little wording changes like that.
I know. I think there's ways around it. I'm not sure exactly where I would go, but I've thought long and hard before about like, man, I should really just sit down and take the criteria as it's worded now and just tweak it. Write my own.
Write your own.
Write my own.
Yeah, do it.
Just write more or less the changes that I would make so that people could understand what I would change. Because in my head, I'll picture it here and there, but I don't write it down. So I should do that. I think I should get around to that. Maybe that'll be my New Year's resolution.
Yeah.
I should probably just lose weight though.
I mean, it should. we're gonna have weeks with no fights.
That's true.
We can go over Scott's
Not too
criteria.
many of them. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's all I had for kind of the year update of 10-8s. But there's still like the judging tendencies, right? It's always interesting who's giving out 10-8s. So there is a new king of 10-8s for 2022. Do you want to take a guess at who it is? It is not Mike Bell. Mike Bell is always the traditional one, right? It was not Mike Bell this year.
The 10-8 king this year.
I think it'll surprise you.
I'm gonna go with Derek Cleary.
Chris Lee.
All right.
Chris Lee was the out judge on 5 10-8, 10-9 splits.
Okay.
And each time he was the 8.
Okay.
Every single time.
You know why I picked Derek Cleary?
I don't.
Because he seemed to be not needing damage.
Well,
That's what I kind of felt.
I mean, I couldn't speak to that. I hadn't given that.
That's just
given
how
that thought in mind.
it appears.
What I would say though is you bring up Derek Cleary. Derek Cleary actually had the most times where he was the out judge in an 8-9 split. 9, but 6 of those he was the 8 and 3 he was the 9. So he actually led in being the out and giving the 8.
Okay,
But,
that's why
but he was still more split is really what it is. Chris Lee, if it was 8-9, he was giving the 8. He was pushing those 8s. Keep going.
I like it, Chris.
Keep going, Chris. You're doing God's work over there. But again, that is actually across all 3 major promotions. That's not just UFC, I should point out. When we talk about the judges' tendencies, I was able to get that data a little more clear for this particular year, right? Eric Colon, by the way, generally one of the more likely to give the 8 when he's out, was actually out only twice in such splits, and each time he gave the 9. So he kind of went against trend in this particular year. Don't know why. It's just the way it happened.
That pork roll.
It wasn't that many. Yeah, God, get that out of here. Taylor Ham. Actually looking up the history of where Taylor Ham came from. I'm not going to bore the listeners with it. Go Google it or whatever, but yeah, it was interesting.
Okay.
Some guy made it up. His last name was Taylor.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
My grandma always called it Taylor's ham.
Well, yeah, I
So-
think that's what it was. It was
Yeah.
it was a product called Taylor's Ham.
Mm.
All right, now we're getting into
Yeah.
it anyway.
Okay.
No, we're not going to do that. Sorry. Apologies. It's Jersey politics. The most important kind of Jersey politics. What we call certain foods. It's not a hoagie, guys. Get out of here. By the way, the next closest in terms of the number of 8-9 splits that they were the out judge to Derek Cleary was Sal D'Amato. He gave 3 8s as the out and 2 as the 9, so he was kind of on both sides there. And then again, Chris Lee had 5, and all of them were the 8. Anthony Maness, I should point out, had the most scored rounds without an 8-9 split.
So he was always in it.
He was always
10-9.
If they had a 9 or they had an 8, he was in the majority. That's really all that I'm saying.
Okay.
There. That's all it was. But that was across 102 rounds in both UFC and Bellator. He did work both. Yeah, that's all I got really on 10-8s.
Okay. What about a little further?
A little further. What do you got?
10-7s?
10-7s. No, 10-7s.
Okay.
That's just where we're at. There's no Tevin 7s being given out, and I would say, given the state of the 8s right now, I mean, it's a wonder when we'll actually get a 7 to come up again.
But
we may
normally I wouldn't even ask about this score, but I have to. 10-10s.
A 10-10 had happened,
Yeah,
as we recall. Yeah. Yes, those who are keen listeners of this show, or maybe they happen to catch this, there was in fact the first UFC 10-10 in nearly 4 years, back in September when the UFC was in Paris. The judge's name was Christophe Chapuis. He scored round 3 of William Gomez against Jarno Aarons, and I forget if that was how the name was pronounced. He scored that one a 10-10, and as I recall, that was not a great application of the 10-10.
Yeah, I don't recall it.
I recall that we could figure out a winner.
Yeah, no, we had a winner
of the round, and realistically, if we're going to give out a 10-10 for 2022, it really ought to have been round 1 of Rose Namajunas and Carla Esparza, and even that wasn't. So
no,
that's where I was at. But just real quick before we move on from the idea of these 10-7s, because I don't have anything more on the 10-10. It's not going to happen very often, guys. Don't expect it again anytime in the next 4 years, unless we go to another territory, right? You never know, I guess. But we might have some more 10-10 chatter coming up in a future episode of this show. So
10-10?
Stay tuned.
You mean 10-7?
10-7, excuse me.
10-7.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not going to bore you with 10-10 talk.
No. Nobody wants to talk about 10-7s. They're stupid.
Yeah.
They're dumb. Just dumb. But that's all I got for the the 8s, the 9s, the 7s, the 10s, whatever. I guess 9s we'll be talking about, but not specifically.
Yeah.
Where should we go now? What do you think?
I mean, we kind of covered this section here.
Yeah.
What's the data says about the most frequently assigned judges. We kind of covered that a little bit.
But there's some interesting things to highlight about, I think, particular judges that I like to get into, right?
Okay.
So, first off, the judge who worked the most rounds this year out of Bellator, UFC, PFL, but I would imagine this carries across all promotions worldwide even. I would be surprised if anybody worked as many rounds as Sal D'Amato, who for the second year in a row turned in exactly 517 scored rounds across the UFC, Bellator, and PFL.
It's kind of impressive.
It's pretty weird. He didn't work any PFL in 2021, so this was the first year that he'd done it, at least in a while. I don't know if he'd done it before, but 417 of those rounds were in the UFC, 88 for Bellator, and 12 for PFL. Extreme consistency, because in 2020 he scored 523 UFC rounds.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
In your data,
Mm-hmm.
are the partial rounds taken into effect that Virginia still has
No.
the right scores?
No, I don't do that.
Okay.
That's garbage.
Just making sure.
Nah. So like Virginia, what Dan's alluding to is if we didn't make it clear enough, in Virginia and also in Florida, they are often asked to write down a score for a fight, a round that was not completed. So if it ended at 2 minutes and 53, if it was finished in the 2 minutes and 53 second mark, it doesn't go to a technical decision. It's just the fight was stopped and it was over. Judges are asked to put the score down. It's kind of useless. It doesn't really matter. So.
It's useless, but it's also I find it crazy how finish isn't an auto 10-7.
Well, yeah,
So,
you would think so.
But
It doesn't. But it doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter.
It
at
really
all.
doesn't.
Yeah.
So I kind of ignore it. But yeah, it's a weird thing. We're not gonna get into that right now, sir.
I
We
was
got
just-
data to get
Well,
over.
the thing is, I was just asking if that was part of the rounds scored.
No,
it counts or not.
no, I do not include those at all.
Okay.
Yeah, so to be clear, and that is fair. That's a fair question, Dan. But no, we don't include those. We're talking about fully scored rounds that would potentially impact the score of the fight. If the fight it was finished because of a TKO or a sub, that wouldn't matter.
But technical decisions, it still counts.
Technicals, absolutely,
Yeah, they're in
yeah,
there.
for
Okay.
sure.
That's a partial round that will
That's
count.
a round that scored. Those count.
Okay.
Mhm. Mike Bell was second, by the way, behind Sal D'Amato, just like last year. But it was much closer this year. Actually had 453 combined rounds across those three promotions. Much closer to becoming number one.
I would say Mike Bell probably has the most rounds scored throughout the whole... Because California runs MMA
That's
almost
a
every
good
single
point.
night.
You bring up a good point. But both of those guys also work the Dana White Contender Series, which I don't even include in my UFC data. I didn't include the Road to UFC tournament that they were doing in Asia either. I feel like maybe in the future I really ought to just get everything I can.
If you can
just
get them,
throw it all in.
Because they don't post those scorecards. I don't think.
I can get those though.
Okay. As long as you can get it,
They
yeah.
send me a link for Dana White Contender Series at the very least, and I
Oh.
think they also did for Road to UFC. I could probably get it now. I could just go back in my email and,
Oh,
and pull it
nice.
out, but I'm not going to do that right now. So, but maybe for the future, I will start trying to do that more. I'd love to get ambitious and go after everybody, like Brave and ACA and KSW and Aries and Cage Warriors and whatever, anywhere, CFFC, whatever the heck.
Who wants to sponsor Scott to do this?
Yeah, you guys someone's got to pay me to do some of this stuff at some point. This is all just on my own time. The New York Post doesn't care that I'm doing this. I hope everybody understands that. That's not something the Post is like, hey, Scott, you should totally use your time to do that. Not a chance. Not a freaking chance. Although I do have ambitions too. I want to do a little bit more, maybe writing relating to judging this year for my outlet, when appropriate. I think I'm going to try and find reasons to get into that a little bit more. But anyway, back to this and judges of interest, right? Only judges Bell, Derek Cleary, and Junichiro Kamijo were on at least half as many scored rounds as Sal D'Amato was. So, over that 250-ish mark across UFC, Bellator, PFL, right?
Mm-hmm.
Eric Colon was in that group a year earlier, 2021, but fell just short of that number this time. He was at 240. Didn't quite hit it. Sal D'Amato, I should also mention, worked 39 5-round fights across those promotions. That's 5 down from 2021, though, so a little bit fewer than in the past. I think part of that owes to the fact that they are traveling just a little bit more, the UFC.
Did anyone get more assignments for 5-rounders?
There were more judges that hit double digits. I should say
Okay.
that the only ones who were in the 20s, at least, other than Judge D'Amato, were judges Bell and Cleary. Bell had 27, Cleary had 26. In the teens, we're talking about Brian Miner had 17. Junichiro Kamijo had 17 as well. Eric Colon had 14. Doug Crosby, we'll get to him a little more a little later, had 13. Ron McCarthy had 12, and Chris Lee had 11. No one else had more than 6. Just a few more people hit double digits this year. I think it was just one more in the whole. And actually, I believe the newcomer was Doug Crosby to that group. Again, we'll talk about Doug a little later.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
There's always room for Doug, isn't there? I do want to move on to Chris Lee, though. We mentioned him before with the 10-8 conversation, and he gets mentioned here and there, right? Of the 7 judges with at least 200 rounds scored from 2022 in my data chart here, his dissent rate of 4.96 was by far the best in that group of 7.
Mm-hmm.
By far. Sal D'Amato was closest at 6.19, but we're still talking about a full almost 1.25% lower. Much more likely to agree with his fellow judges. Again, it doesn't make him more right or wrong. It just means he was more likely to agree with at least one other individual who was assigned to score that round. That's a big thing, though. I think there's something to being on the same page, right?
Yeah.
Now, 2 people could be on the wrong page, but you're more likely to be on than off. So if you're agreeing, it can only be good on the whole, especially when you got 200 rounds under your belt, right? And normally it would be otherwise, I think, just a fantastic year for Chris. But I would say there are 2 things that I do have to mention. First off, and this is data related, he had fewer 5-round assignments this year because he was down to just 11. But his percentage of especially UFC work in 5-rounders was down to 8.8%. The previous 3 years in a row, he was at 13.5, 13.8, and 13.8% of his assignments were for 5-rounders. So there's a clear 5% drop in the number of times he's getting that 5-rounder.
Only speculating here,
Okay.
but that got to go back to Felder RDA.
Oh, I doubt
Dang
it
it,
because
no?
that was 2 years ago now.
That was 2 years ago?
Yeah.
That wasn't 2021?
that was December 2020.
Oh, okay.
Nothing changed last
okay.
year. He was
All right, so then you don't-
I shouldn't say nothing changed. He went from 13.8, 13.8 to 13.5. He might have gotten one less assignment.
Okay.
Maybe. So, no,
I
I
guess-
don't.
feel
I
he
would
was
bet
kinda-
that's
people
not
were-
the case.
People were pretty rough on him.
Sure, they were. But I think
Wow.
also the commissions don't necessarily care what the people think.
Yeah.
I think they have their own evaluation systems and they have their own egos at the way things are supposed to go.
Okay.
So I would bet that wasn't it. Who knows the factors? I really don't want to speculate, to be perfectly honest. That would, for me, that's irresponsible. I don't want to do that. You can be irresponsible.
I love speculating.
Yeah, you could do that.
I'll
whatever.
speculate on everything.
Well, you're a jerk.
I just love it.
The one other thing I would say that is, and this is something that kind of held me back from me maybe echoing you in naming him the judge of the year for the judges.
I named him
was, again,
runner-up.
It was that. Yes, that's right. You had him for the runner-up. I chose to abstain from a runner-up. I think there's plenty of quality judges, and I'm not saying
Actually,
Chris
he
Lee
wasn't
is
even
not a
runner-up.
quality.
He was
judge.
just honorable mention.
He was honorable mention. That's right. Which is more or less a runner-up.
But I also honorable mentioned Mike Bell.
Oh, that's right. You did. Okay. But anyway, what I'm beating around the bush here is round 4 of Josh Emmett against Calvin Kattar. I thought was just kind of a rough score. Went back and listened to what we talked about at the time. We both agreed bad score, good judge.
I like that.
More or less. That was what we said.
All right.
And I agree. I don't think any less of Chris Lee as a judge, but I think that was, unfortunately, it was kind of a little bit of a stain on the year because that was a big fight. And granted, you can get to 3 rounds for Josh Emmett. Sal D'Amato had. I believe he gave 1, 2, and 3 to Josh Emmett. You can get there. It's not a robbery. It wasn't a bad scorecard in the sense that you couldn't score it for Josh Emmett, and he did. It's the manner in which they got there. It's just, it didn't add up to me. So I hope that's the last time we talk about that round because I don't think it's even as egregious as, well, I think it was round 3 of Felder and RDA. Is the one that didn't make any sense. I thought that was probably a tougher one than this one. But we both agreed that should have been a Kattar round. And if that's the only round that changes and everything else stays the same, Kattar actually gets the win. It is what it is. Not a robbery. But again, bad score, good judge.
Yep, I like it.
Then we move on to, well, do you want to call him a bad judge? It's up to you, Dan. I'm going to let you put the coin.
No,
here.
I won't.
You won't say it's a bad
I won't
judge.
say bad. I'll just say he gives us a lot of interesting things to talk about.
Sure. And that is Doug Crosby. We teased him before. We've been talking about him for weeks. With any luck, this will be the last time we talk about him for maybe a little while. But just a quick recap of last year when we spoke about him, because we did talk about him on the Data Show last year. He had a low descent percentage, especially in Bellator in particular. He worked 159 scored rounds in 2021. 10th most out of all the judges in the data pool. 77 of those rounds were in the UFC, 82 for Bellator. So he was more split at that point, right? But we did note how the way he talks about scoring rounds just isn't consistent with the way the other judges do. Something we've been beaten for a while.
Yeah,
and has really come to light now that obviously there's all of this, the fallout from his wild weekend in Mohegan Sun and Nevada. Turning in the scorecards in Danny Sabatello 50-45. What? And then, of course, the Patty Pimblett 29-28 by giving round 1 to Patty instead of Jared Gordon, which, again, I don't think is egregious as any of the Sabatello rounds, but nonetheless didn't think it was the strongest score, even as the majority.
Yeah, Chris Lee nailed that one.
He did. That is a Chris Lee round.
So
Chris Lee got it right. There are a lot of times. And by the way, do you know who did score that fight for Kattar?
Who?
Doug Crosby. it's round and round we go, right?
There's probably certain disconnects in some parts of the criteria that don't always show in every fight that he has a different view of.
Or does he just do his own thing? Because you could read any sort of number of interviews he's done over the years, and it sounds like he just does his own thing.
That's true.
It doesn't seem that he cares what other people do, because he'll show up at Extreme Couture and be like, this is how I judge fights. Well, how about you give how judges are supposed to score fights? That's what the fighters need.
Yeah,
you don't need them to be like, hey, I want Doug on my fight because I know how he's gonna score.
Because that's crazy that happens, because that's what Twitter does. They score fights how they want to score fights.
Correct.
And that's where most of it comes in, because no one knows what the actual way you're supposed to score a fight.
Sure.
So that's kind of weird.
Yeah. But anyway, to get into data, and I should also point out that Doug Crosby was not licensed in Nevada until October 2021. So that probably accounts for the fact that he had much fewer UFC rounds, especially compared to this year, where in 2022, he combined for 224 rounds between UFC, Bellator, PFL. 160 of those were in the UFC, which is one more than he had all of last year in the 2 majors that he worked. 43 Bellator, so much fewer, and then 21 PFL rounds as well. His descent rate was 7.59 this year, up from 5.66 a year ago. I mean, roughly still an average, but obviously it's elevated, right? It's up in this year with even more rounds, a bigger pool to work with, right? He also worked 9 more 5-rounders than the year before. I mentioned he broke into that double-digit territory. He'd only worked 4 the year before. So he got a lot more, let's say, important fights in theory, the main events, the title fights, these kind of things, right? That said, it's entirely possible that we will never go over the data as it relates to Doug Crosby Again, who the heck knows? Because, there's been all the shenanigans the last few weeks, the revelations in the aftermath that we're talking about as well, that we're alluding to, and his own media appearance on Chael Sonnen's podcast.
Which may be a weekly thing.
Well, there wasn't
right?
last week.
Oh, there wasn't last
No.
week.
And when I say last week, I am talking about the last week of 2022.
Yes.
I actually got my years right this time.
It was
who
also
knows?
a week of Christmas, so.
Yeah, but, maybe he's just talking. I think he just talks. That's what I gather. But maybe we won't have to talk about him again. Who knows? There's a lot of people who would not miss him. And to be perfectly honest, if he is going to judge fights in a different way than other judges, I wouldn't miss him. I know you said he's an interesting personality. You think you like the idea of
Listen,
him.
if Doug Crosby had a podcast, I would listen to it. I think he's an interesting guy. That whole stuntman thing was a shock to me. I didn't know he was a stuntman.
Yeah, I knew that.
Or a stunt coordinator, whatever.
The stunt
it is.
coordinator, yes.
I'd love to hear stunt stories.
But would he tell a stunt story, or would he tell a story about a golf club for 30 minutes and then tell you 5 seconds of a stunt story?
I don't know, but that was also I was captivated.
There you go.
I was in.
Well, good for you, sir. That is all I had, though, data-wise on Doug Crosby. I just wanted to make sure we kept him, because we did hit on him last year. So I said, you know what? Let's revisit him again in his data, because why the heck not, right? We're actually going to have a little bit more to say about Doug in a little bit, too. Not that much more. There is some more.
Yeah.
Anthony Maness is another judge I wanted to highlight here. We don't talk a whole lot about Anthony. I mean, we kind of do, but we also don't, because Anthony Maness doesn't really get a whole lot of those major assignments. Especially when he works in Nevada, which is he's more recent addition to the Nevada stable the last couple years. This year he worked a lot more, so now pushed his round count for the year between UFC and Bellator up to 102. Finally hit triple digits. With those judges with at least 100 rounds of my data pool this particular year, his dissent rate of 12.75 was by far the highest. The most likely judge to disagree with 2 other judges that he sits with for a round by quite a wide margin. Next closest out of the 12 that meet that threshold of triple digits was Eric Colon, and he's at 7.95, so significantly lower. And that is still, by the way, par for a top judge. It's not like deviant to be at just under 8. We did not award any Couchside Overrides to Judge Maness, despite him being out in 11 of 64 UFC rounds that he turned in. And that UFC dissent rate, by the way, is 17.2%. When he's on a UFC round, you almost got a 1 in 5 chance that we're going to be talking about him as the out. It's not great. That doesn't mean he's a bad judge, but again, you don't want to be in that position. You don't want to be the out, and he's out a lot. Maybe there's just more conversations that need to happen between him and his fellow judges. I don't know. That's speculation, and I don't really know. But I would say the fact that we haven't talked about a round that, I think everyone's kind of up in arms with him about. I can't remember one that we got real like, what were you seeing there, Anthony?
Yeah.
Or that a lot of people
that was
were
our
getting
bad
mad
on the
about
whole.
too?
That was, I'm gonna take care of that.
What's that?
This year? Any particular round where we don't really understand more, I'm gonna make note of them so we're aware of them.
Oh, I see. Where you and I are not on the same page with the out judge, we couldn't really see it that way. I see. Yeah. Or the majority even.
Anyway, yeah.
Depending on what territory we end up in.
We had that one
too.
fight. Yeah,
that's true.
That one
and I'll mention that one in a little bit. But so his rounds over the past 4 years, by the way, also crossed 100 this year. He's up to 110 overall. And out of a group of 22 judges that meet that, his rate is still the highest at 14.55%. Dave Torelli is the closest out of them. He's at 11.21. Only other judge over 10, and he's got 232 rounds for himself as well. So he's got a higher rate of rounds, but also a lower dissent rate. Worth noting, while we bring up Judge Torelli, because we did talk about him last year having a high rate, in 2022, across 74 rounds, UFC and Bellator, he was at 6.76 dissent. A big improvement in terms of being on the same page. Good to see. You like to see it. That's a totally normal rate. Mm-hmm. So good on Judge Torelli. But yes, I kind of hope for Judge Manus' sake we don't have to be talking about him in one of these rounds that everyone's kind of up in arms about. He doesn't get like those major assignments yet, and he may not just quite be ready for a lot of those bigger ones yet in Nevada. You know, there's a pecking order. There's a lot of judges that get those bigger assignments. You know, he might just be stuck kind of getting a couple here and there for a little while.
Yep.
International judges. We always got to highlight these gentlemen, and there are ladies or female judges internationally, but when we talk about the international judges, the ones that get the rounds, typically we're talking about the ones in the UK, and especially globally, the gold standard, I don't think you would disagree with me here, is Ben Cartledge.
I agree.
Yeah. Wonderful judge. My judge of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Got the judgy. That is in the mail. Sure to work its way there. Easily the lowest dissent percentage of any judge with at least 100 scored rounds this year, UFC, Bellator, PFL. And then again, does not include Cage Warriors or any of the other promotions that are worked in Europe by this very busy judge.
Speaking of Ben, got licensed in Nevada this year.
That's right.
That's a huge.
That is right. Maybe we'll see even more of Ben because he'll be over in the United States from time to time. We shall see. But he only had 4 dissents out of 129 scored rounds in this calendar year. Bounced back from a very high dissent rate of 14%, just 86 rounds examined last year. So that always felt very fluky to me. And it just felt like not a very large sample size because he still rates as one of the top judges over the 4-year period that I've studied here. He is a very close second in dissent rate during that period of UFC rounds in particular. With judges who have at least 200 rounds scored. 5.06 is his rate. Clemens Werner is just a hair better at 5.02. Although Clemens jumped a lot more this year. He had a lot more dissents.
Okay.
But having said that, still very much up there. And again, I really want to make sure I stress this, that we're talking about these dissents. We're talking about a high number. We're talking about a low number. That, again, does not make them a bad judge. It doesn't mean they had a bad year. What it means is that statistically, they weren't as aligned with the judges that they worked with on those rounds over the course of 12 months or 4 years, whichever data set we're talking about, right? It really bears repeating because I just want to make it clear that we're not saying a judge is bad simply because of that number. But it does help paint a little bit of a picture from time to time. It's a good tool, right? It's a good tool to examine. That's what I hope people will take away from this show. That is it as far as the kind of the data that I collected for, like 10-8s and judges, that kind of thing. But we also have to circle back to that thing you brought up in the beginning, Couchside Overrides. You are not suited to do that noise, my friend. Why don't you take a seat and let Papa do it later?
Someone had to do it.
All right. I like to do it when someone gets it, but I'll give it to you because that was just so terrible. Anyway, again, mentioned before, but for those who don't listen, we award, Dan and I, the Couchside Override to an out judge in a split round that we both agreed with, and essentially are overriding and saying they had the more preferable score. Not that the other ones had it wrong, but that we saw it that way as well, and we thought, you know what, we'll give them props, right? I think that's worth it. Judges get no props. They never get props. Give them props here. We awarded 61 Couchside Overrides this year, sir. And this was, by the way, you tracked this data, so I want to give a shout out to Dan. This was Dan tracking the Couchside Overrides this year. Mostly UFC rounds. We talk about Bellator and PFL from time to time. We don't do every round from those events. That would get tedious, I think. But when it bears necessary and we can fit it in, we make sure to do it, right? 48, though, of those rounds were in the UFC. They were UFC contested rounds out of a possible 259. So our rate of overriding is at 18.5% this year, down about 3%. But more or less, still 1 in 5 times we're going to give you a Couchside Override.
All right.
More or less. Also, we did one Couchside Override outside of that number 48 for a unanimous round. We do not typically do this, but we examined a round that was judged by 3 local Texas judges. It felt like we could do that because, well, Texas is going to Texas. And they're not necessarily always in line with what we expect from, let's say, the other judges, right? So we did do a Couchside Override for the 3rd round of Roxanne Modafferi against Casey O'Neill.
Yes.
I know you felt pretty strong about that one.
Yeah, that was my most surprising scorecard of the year.
Yes, it was. The judges on that one, by the way,
Round
were
3.
referee Kerry Hatley, who also judges when Texas says, "Hey, go judge." And also, I believe he's got some more judging assignments this year. And also, by the way, he's got a pretty good dissent percentage. It's very low sample size still, but not so bad. Kerry Hadley, Ivan Guzman, and the infamous Robert Alexander, who is, well, we talked about it last week, is in an unfortunate situation involving youngsters and child sex crimes. Less said about it, the better. But it's disgusting. Anyway, at any rate, on the whole, when you take those 49 overrides, counting the one of the unanimous round, Dan and I would overturn only 49 rounds from the UFC. That is only 5.1% of UFC rounds overall that if we had ultimate power, we would change. So 95% of the time, Dan and I are completely good with whatever the majority said.
Yeah.
And out of that 5%, most of the time, we still can see it the other way.
Yeah, like you said, Scott, I mean, this paints a perfect picture that there's a huge issue with judging.
Huge issue.
Yeah.
Super major uber issue. I would wager, and we didn't do a good job this year of tracking when we did think a round maybe wasn't the greatest of scores.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't do a good job of that. I think you have taken that task upon yourself for the coming year, and I appreciate greatly to track that a little better. So now we'll kind of be able to say, okay, maybe that many rounds is the times we would actually say, okay, maybe they didn't get it right.
Yeah.
But I would wager it's about 1% or less.
I think less.
I don't know. Could be about 1. I don't know. We'll see. Depends how much they travel. They're going to Australia, my friend.
Were there 2.9 fights?
Sir, they're going to Australia.
2.9 rounds.
Just saying. They'll go to Texas probably.
I told you. Yeah, I know.
It's
We
gonna be an
mentioned,
issue.
yeah, Australia's. That's the most nervous one, just because of the level of that fight.
I should have done how many Texas rounds are split off too. That would have been a fun regional one.
I know we had.
Maybe next year.
We did we did that one show. We had just a section for that one judge. I forget his name.
Patrick Patland?
No,
Is
not
it him?
Patrick Patland. It was another one. I forget.
JJ Ferraro?
Nope.
The fact that we have so many judges we can
Yeah.
just name off the top of our heads from Texas that had issues, it's not great. It's not a good sign. Yeah. But anyway, as far as overrides go, Sal D'Amato actually led in overrides. That probably is no surprise because he does score the most rounds. Number 2, he had 13. Number 2 was Mike Bell with 10. Again, he's second in number of rounds, so by sheer volume, it makes a lot of sense. Only Ron McCarthy had more than 5 overrides. He got 6. But he also led in the percent of times that he got a couchside override as the out judge. So when he's the out judge, 42.9% of the time, about closing in on 50% of the time, we sided with him.
I got that
Very
judge's
strong
name.
judge. I know he went for Patty Pimblett in round 1. I disagree with that round, but incredible judge. I think he is a wonderful judge, and I'm very glad that he's one of the youngest judges that works in Vegas. He might even be the youngest. I don't really know. I haven't seen their birth certificates, but hopefully we have Judge Ron McCarthy around the sport for a long time. I think he's a terrific judge.
There's going to be a McCarthy in officiating MMA forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe my brothers-in-law. They're
Yeah.
McCarthys.
Yeah.
They're not related. I mean, like maybe their great like times 30 grandparents were the same people. I don't know.
Possibly.
Who knows? I do like to say, oh yeah, it's like, oh, it's your uncle, Big John McCarthy, to my wife. She's like, shut up, I don't care. Just doesn't care. The next highest percentage, by the way, I'll just kind of run them down quickly. Sal D'Amato, 35.1%. David Leatherby, 30%. 3 out of 10 times when he's the out judge, we're with him. That was very high. I don't think we mentioned David yet, but that's a good one for him. He gets a lot of couchside overrides. Mike Bell is at 27.8. Clemens Werner, 1 out of 4, 25. Chris Lee, 23.5. And then Dave Torelli, 1 out of 5. 20% of the time we were siding with Judge Torelli. The rest were under 20%. Adelaide Bird, by the way, had the lowest percentage of overrides for being the out judge among those who get a couchside override. So there were a couple judges that did not get a couchside override. I'm talking about the ones that actually did. In her case, she only got 1. 9.1% of the time we sided with her if she was the out judge. Of those with 75 or more rounds scored, there were no couchside overrides for the following judges: Brian Miner, 172 rounds. Anthony Manus, 102 rounds. This is scored, not dissents. And Marcel Varela. I wrote down 72, but I could have swore it was 75.
But like we said, we don't watch all these rounds these guys scored.
That's true. We don't.
So it's possible that they would have a few.
That's true. Also, it is worth noting that Judge Varela and his 2.67 dissent percentage was the lowest out of 15 in this group. Very good rate. Excellent rate. Be nice to see him get more work. And also Daryl Ransom, UK judge, out of 51 scored rounds in UFC, PFL, Bellator, what have you, only 1 dissent. Best of all judges with at least 40 of those rounds. 1.96% dissent rate. Really, really terrific. So give the guy more room. Give him more work. Let's see more Ransom.
Yeah.
On the flip side of the Couchside Override, of course, we don't talk about this, though. We don't really talk about this when we talk about the Couchside Override. It's the 2 judges that are overridden.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't make them wrong, like we said. It doesn't mean anything, but, they're the ones who were kind of saying, well, we're stiffing you. We're going the other way, right? It's just the way it is. Only 3 judges were overridden at least 10 times. The top 2 will, or not the top 2, but 2 of those 3 will not surprise you. Judges D'Amato and Bell, they were each overridden 11 times, but when you score 400 plus rounds, kind of makes sense. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
The leader in times overridden with 18, Doug Crosby.
18 times.
18 times Doug Crosby was in the majority of a contested round, and we said, nah, it ain't you. Now, we didn't say that to Doug. We sided with Doug a couple times. We gave him 2 Couchside Overrides this year. But we went against him 18 times, and I don't think it's personal. I don't have any. I've never had a bad interaction with Doug. Never had a good I've never interacted with Doug, to be perfectly honest. I saw him at the ABC conference, and I just kind of let him sit crisscross applesauce on the ground where he was sitting. Left him alone. Didn't feel compelled to talk to him. I wasn't that interested. But
and to note,
yes,
there's another judge agreeing with him.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Each of these 18
rounds.
Yeah.
So there's no personal here. So. But the fact that we went against him 18 times, and he only was in the majority 207 times, so we overrode him 8.7% of the time that he was in the majority. That's a lot. That's a hell of a lot.
See, that's what I was getting at earlier when I said maybe there's a portion of the criteria that he does on his own, that does a different way than most.
I bet you, I'll say this. I wouldn't be surprised if he scores takedowns differently.
But see,
he's been doing it for 20 years, and, I mean, that can be a good thing, and it can also be a bad thing, because experience is a good thing. Sal D'Amato has been scoring combat sports for more than 30 years. Great judge. Gold standard in this country, I think, and in this continent. But we had the opportunity to speak with Sal in ABC, and it's been very useful to get that information. He was part of the training course we took with Kevin McDonald, and it was really terrific. He seems on the ball. He seems to understand modern judging. I mean, he's teaching it, so he should, right? Right,
but that's what
Doug
I'm saying.
does not necessarily do that when he talks.
I'm saying I'd love to go back to these 18 rounds. And find if there even is a common denominator in each of these rounds.
Sounds like you volunteered.
Yeah.
Go do it.
All right.
Show's over. Dan's got work. No, we're almost done. We're actually near the exit here, though, because I said that percentage that we overrode him was 8.7%. There was one judge who had a bunch of rounds scored. I think the cutoff I did was about 50, and that was Tony Weeks. Had 70 rounds scored, but we overrode him 9.38% of the time, a little higher. But a smaller sample size. Doug was in more than 200 rounds, so there's a lot. Daryl Ransom also, and not to poo-poo Daryl Ransom. I think he's a terrific judge. He should get more work. But we did override him 4 times, and in a small sample size, that meant we overrode him 8% of the time. So, of the judges with at least 75 rounds scored, though, it was Judge Cartledge who was overridden 4.8% of the time. Still way less than Crosby, right? Crosby scored 95 more rounds in our data table, and really twice as much. So the judges with that high volume group of 100 or more, most of them were in the 1.6 to 3.5% of the time we overrode them. So that's a kind of a normal number. Ben Cartledge, not too far off. Again, he's the gold standard. I'm not going to tell him he's wrong, unless we thought he's wrong. But I don't think we've ever had that with a pen round. I don't think we've ever had a round where we're like, what was Cartledge watching there? Like, we just kind of respectfully went the other way most of the time.
I would say guaranteed we did that.
Sure. Although he probably puts, like, beans on toast, so, like, I don't know. That's weird.
Hey, I'm down to try. I'm pretty hungry right now.
I'm not a beans guy, to be perfectly honest. That's really where it comes down. Sure.
I love beans.
Not a beans guy. Black beans I like better than brown beans. That what they're called.
pinto beans?
I thought they were white. I thought pinto was white.
Wait, you got navy beans, you got kidney beans, you got black beans, pinto beans. You got chickpeas, which are actually garbanzo beans, I believe. You got string beans.
You're a big bean guy.
Beans are delicious.
They are the musical fruit, so I hear.
Yeah, get down with the beans, man.
Just black beans. Look, I'll eat. You know, like if I get like a burrito from, let's say, Taco Bell or something like that, and they put the other beans on there, refried beans, whatever. Yeah. I'll eat that. It's fine. But I would prefer black beans. Okay. So when my wife makes beans, she typically uses black beans.
So if you go to Chipotle, your order would be black beans.
I don't like Chipotle. I like Qdoba. It's better.
Okay, well, when you go to Qdoba, your order would be black beans.
Get it right.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, all right, whatever.
But anyway, we are obviously trailing off. We are actually at the end of all the data that I wanted to share, though. So, but once again, us overriding, and I want to make sure I stress this, us overriding is not the same as us saying that the other two judges got it wrong. It's just not.
Most of the time.
Yeah. It doesn't mean that. It can mean that. It doesn't mean that implicitly.
It just means we saw it differently.
Sure. But
again, we still understand the other score.
But that is it. That's the data show for 2022. I hope you guys got something interesting out of it. If there's something that maybe we didn't cover in this episode that we didn't already say we're hoping to do maybe in the future, please let us know. You know how to get at us. Like I said, email scottrfontana@gmail.com or Twitter or Instagram DMs @Scott_Fontana. Happy to talk to you. Just be nice.
Scott, you got any goals for the year?
I would like to lose some weight. I mentioned that before. Okay. I got a little heavy. I would like to get back to jiu-jitsu. I think that would play into that heavily. Nice. So I really want to do that. I want to complete my data chart. That won't happen, but I would like to.
Get closer.
That's a goal. I can set goals that I can't achieve. You just gotta reach for the stars, and you settle into the clouds or whatever the heck the stupid saying is.
Well, just make the goal improve the data set.
No, the goal is to get to the end.
Eventually.
Yeah.
But you got to go step at a time.
I'm okay falling short. I just want to set the goal the highest. Why are you trying to get me to aim low?
I don't want you to aim low.
I think
I want you. The way goals work is you knock them out brick by brick.
Oh, that's what I've been doing.
That's what I've been doing. You keep building.
No. I'm doing it.
With that said, my goal for the year, I'm gonna try to get on your data sheet.
You're gonna try and get on my data sheet.
Yeah.
How?
Put me on the data sheet. I'm gonna judge every round, and I want to know my descent percentage.
You're talking to me about shooting for like middle goals. You're shooting for something that can't happen. What are you talking about?
I'm gonna score.
Have you gone crazy?
I'm gonna score every round.
You have.
I'm
gone
gonna give
crazy.
you my score for every fight for this year, and just throw me in there.
Oh, so what you're saying is on your own, you're gonna score every single round.
I want to see how I compare.
Okay.
How well?
I thought you were saying you would be the one who was licensed to judge every single fight. That's why I was confused.
Oh,
like, what are you talking about?
Actually, no. That's another thing. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, that wouldn't make any sense. What I think you should do, I think you should reach out to the commissions and try to see if you can get some shadow judging in. I would like to see that. That's my goal for you.
Well, that's not how goals work, but yeah, it's my goal.
No, I'm setting a goal for you.
Oh, thanks.
And that does it for us. I hope we brought your new year in with some interesting information and hopefully some fun.
Yeah, and next week we'll be back with an interesting topic. Is it next week?
It is next week. That is our plan. We'll see.
We can't break down Rising, right?
No, we're not doing Rising.
Yeah, we're not doing that.
No, it's not happening.
All right.
Hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Have a great new year.